Hello and welcome to the latest Bottom Line podcast from the Liverpool Echo's Blood Red channel, where we take a look at what happens away from the pitch at Anfield. In recent weeks, we've covered such topics as the RedBird investment, Liverpool's financial accounts, and the fallout from the failed European Super League plot. And we've welcomed guests to the show such as football finance expert Kieran Maguire, owner of Danish side Helsingør, Jordan Gardner, and football economics professor Stefan Szymanski. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Daniel Geey, a sports lawyer at Sheridan Sport, a law firm which specialises in sports and e-sport. Daniel is also a successful author. His book, Done Deal, shining a light on the inside practices of football contracts, transfer dealings, and the big business of the Premier League. I can confirm that it is a hugely insightful piece of work, and I recommend it highly. Today, we are going to be discussing multi-club portfolios. What are they for? Why are they becoming more prevalent in the game? What are the benefits, and what does it mean for Liverpool and FSG moving forward? Daniel, welcome.
Thanks very much, Dave, and thanks for the very kind words on the book.
It's a great read. It's a first port of call for me, especially when I've been trying to decipher everything about multi-club ownership. It's been hugely insightful. I thought it's a timely topic because we've seen so much of this going on. I mean, Red Bull have already kind of cornered the market in it, I suppose. They have a huge myriad of clubs attached to what they do. And likewise, we've seen recently in Manchester City have expanded their City football group in Europe and beyond. What does it all mean? Why are clubs looking towards this, and what are the benefits of them doing it?
Well, I think there are quite a few in practice and in theory, but the practicalities of owning one club, never mind numerous clubs, are pretty difficult in truth. I mean, I think you only need to look to, unfortunately, the difficulties and problems that owners, when they come in and take control of one club, to understand to get under the bonnet of how a football club runs, how the ecosystem works, how deals get done, how the commercials of stuff, of stadium issues, regulatory stuff, agents. For lots of ownership groups that are quite new to the football space, if not to the sports franchise space, football is sometimes seen as a bit of a basket case to a degree. But I think if we're talking about then, how City Football Group have done things really well, the guys, the Pozzo family at Watford obviously own Udinese as well, Red Bull to a degree as well. And other entities are obviously the Pacific Group that own Barnsley and other clubs, including clubs in Belgium too. I think one of the things that springs to mind are efficiencies and economies of scale to a degree. So if, for example, you have, or the group has a very big commercial department, that those sports rights properties can be marketed and spread across numerous territories and jurisdictions. And then you have very good brand relationships. That obviously helps. If you have one centralized entity that takes care of everything from data to scouting to talent identification, that obviously can have its benefits. We can talk about in time, obviously, about the different regulatory employment and work permit regimes that obviously can be of value to various clubs in certain jurisdictions pre and post Brexit as well. And then generally, if we're talking about that commercial, on-field, managerial management, and then all of those central hub issues combined, that can be of major benefits to one entity that's looking to acquire clubs in different jurisdictions. At the same time, it's very hard to do well, and that's why obviously a lot of credit has to go to entities like the City Group, who obviously have big financial muscle, but at the same time need to try and do things in the right way to benefit from all of those clubs in all of those jurisdictions.
Could there be a few headaches posed by it? Because I note in Done Deal it mentions about Red Bull's own problems when almost the clubs in that group, some of them become almost too successful. So you have Salzburg now kind of biting at their heels in the Champions League. What are the kind of the rules and regulations around kind of this method of ownership in terms of making sure that it doesn't affect kind of the integrity of competition?
So the brief story really is that each league will have their own ownership rules. So if you can imagine on a domestic level, and then obviously for international club competition, like the different UEFA competitions, there then will be another layer of UEFA club rules and integrity rules. But usually the way that things work, at least on a domestic level, is no owner can own more than one club who may be competing in the same competition. So, for example, Liverpool's owners, FSG, wouldn't be able to buy or have a significant stake in a championship club or a League One club, for example, because there is the possibility, probably less likely possibility, Liverpool get relegated, but the more possibility that a League One to championship club get into the Premier League and then would have to be able to play against a team or two teams that were co-owned. And then you have all the issues that you talked about around integrity of competition, around is it a benefit for one team to win at the detriment to the other team? Is it that off-field decisions are taken rather than the the on-field performance of particular players in a managerial team? So that's at a domestic level. But obviously when it becomes more pronounced can be at a European, usually it's a European club competition level, where there have been instances in the past with Red Bull and then ENIC, obviously Spurs' owners, when they own stakes in clubs like AEK Athens and Sparta Prague and others, where if one central ownership group owns and or controls more than one club that are competing in the same international competition, European competition, then there can be issues around integrity of competition. So, for example, I'll try and give a practical example. Let's just say one team, two teams were owned by the same entity. They were playing each other in the last round of the Champions League group games. One team needed to win in order to get through to the knockout round. The other team had already finished bottom and had no incentive to win and didn't really matter. Then there would be questions about the perceived integrity of that game going ahead, because presumably the owners who own both clubs would say to the team that couldn't win anything, well, let our other team win who has the better chance then of getting into the knockout phases, etc. So the UEFA rules on multi-club ownership effectively mean is that no set of clubs whose owners have decisive influence, at least decisive influence or control over both clubs, can compete in the same competition. And that's when there's obviously those issues for entities that are wanting to buy more than one club in different leagues have to bear in mind, because if that actual issue arises and both teams become successful, that is potentially something which is obviously going to curtail the potential value of those clubs if one of them isn't able to compete in what could be a lucrative Europa League or a lucrative Champions League run.
How did Red Bull manage to kind of get around that situation with RB Leipzig and Salzburg?
Well, there were ultimately what was demonstrated was that Red Bull actually didn't have control over both clubs. There were particular commercial partnership agreements. There were particular individuals that sat on boards that had decision-making capabilities. There were particular transfers and loans between the clubs, etc. And what both clubs had to demonstrate was that Red Bull, the entity, didn't actually have those controlling elements over both clubs. And what actually happened in the end after the investigations were, I can't remember which club it was offhand, but one of the clubs effectively then had to demonstrate and had to terminate quite a lot of cooperation agreements with the other to show that they were at an arm's length and that there weren't those competing interests which could effectively devalue the integrity should those two teams play each other and play in the same competition.
Because it can pose an enormous headache, I suppose, isn't it, for clubs wanting to move forward with that kind of multi-club ownership model. It has its benefits, as you touched on there, but also another benefit that could arise, certainly for UK clubs, you feel, is around Brexit, which I know you briefly touched on before. I mean, a quick look at Liverpool's youth setup there. I mean, they've got players like Mateusz Musiałowski, who they've got high hopes for, Melkamu Frauendorf, players like that who've come to the club in the past 12, 18 months prior to Brexit rules kicking in. That would ultimately, if it was to happen now, prohibit those kind of players from moving to Liverpool as freely as they could do. I suppose a multi-club ownership, having more clubs in the stable across Europe, means you can place those players around there until such time that they tick the right boxes for achieving a permit, and you kind of think that's going to be a huge boost to kind of the bigger clubs in securing top European talent, because otherwise it prohibits them from doing so.
It's true. There's always a number of nuances and all of that. And there's almost two things combined. One is obviously the multi-club ownership model. The second is obviously the post-Brexit governing body endorsement process, which is the work permit process, which has changed quite considerably. Because if you remember, and as you know, whilst we're in the European Union, the ability for European citizens to move freely between member states was enshrined in the European treaties. That's obviously not the case post-Brexit. And then the FA, along with the Premier League and the EFL, have put in new regulations, which effectively mean if you are an international player that hasn't played the right number of international games, depending on the strength of your country and where your country that you're playing in is ranked, then it's basically a points-based system. And then it depends on the strength of the league that you are effectively playing in and how well your club is doing in the league as a result. So you're right to the extent that if, let's just say, FSG buy a Belgian club, for example, or a Portuguese club, for example, that yes, it is possible to be able to potentially buy particular players, put them in those leagues which are historically more EU friendly to a degree in terms of for immigration purposes, and then once either they play the right number of requisite games, or are playing international football, or are playing in a strong league. Belgium is one of those categories, at least, that if you play in a certain amount of games, you're likely to be able to get a work permit into the UK. The issue is, like we talked about, is strategically, I would have thought one of the main aims for those teams or those ownership group is really being able to push those clubs into European competition and into Champions League competition. And there's obviously a big risk, a significant risk, that if they actually are successful and they're barred from those competitions, then there is effectively a financial ceiling because of those clubs not being able to compete in competition. But yes, you're right in that there is that feeder process that there might even be without current ownership. Vitesse Arnhem, if I remember correctly, have good relationships with Chelsea, if I remember correctly. That they don't have current co-owners or control. Chelsea doesn't have control over them, but at the same time, they have a very good cooperative understanding. And it might well be that even if FSG aren't looking, or other clubs aren't looking to purchase clubs, that there are strong cooperation agreements in place with a number of clubs, in particular strong leagues, that can benefit both parties in the short to medium term.
FSG, through the recent RedBird investment, have been quite specific on areas that it might be used. I mean, they've talked about adding more sporting teams. They haven't been specific in terms of saying we want to add more football teams. They've mentioned about the NHL and the NBA. The NFL seems cost prohibitive to add in new franchises because of the sheer cost involved. I don't think there's a team worth less than $1.5 billion in among that group, because it's one of the most lucrative sporting leagues in the world. But it does seem that this kind of model does seem to chime a bit more with what FSG do in terms of creating value, whether it be players' cost efficiencies are something that they absolutely love. So this does seem to be something which does seem to chime with the kind of model that they have in place already, and seems to be almost a natural progression.
Well, indeed. And, I think, just as you said, there's probably a slightly wider play, which is, they've obviously got the Red Sox, they've got different multimedia interests as well. LeBron James and others are now shareholders in the wider group, as well as the new minority shareholders that have come in relatively recently, which obviously frees up capital in lots of different directions. So I think it's probably fair to say that it doesn't necessarily mean that FSG are going to be looking for the football clubs. It might well be that they're looking for the sports properties in the more general sense, if that's football clubs possibly, but if that's other particular entities across the world from a sporting perspective and or from an entertainment perspective, because ultimately the links between football, sport, entertainment, streaming, premium content, music, film, TV, all of these entertainment industries are overlapping in so many different and diverse ways. I mean, everyone's always talking about, for example, I'm not wanting to go off tangent, Premflix as a way to be able to, exploit in a positive way greater broadcasting revenues. And we've seen with Super League, we've seen with Project Big Picture, the idea of wanting to engage fans in a slightly different way, possibly bypassing broadcasters. So you can see where all of this is going, which is, to a degree, sports properties that they have a track record of being able to positively bring success to those teams within reason, whilst at the same time growing those properties' valuations, and then also obviously being able to take advantage of those situations just in a positive way, again, like they did with Liverpool however many years ago it was, where they effectively bought Liverpool almost out of administration, have put significant resource into the club, and now are one of the top teams in Europe. So hopefully, as a Liverpool fan as well, that will continue to a degree. But you can see where the strategy ultimately is: buy undervalued assets, use expertise and the right personnel in the right way, and build up a successful strategy on and off the pitch.
Because Gerry Cardinale's RedBird coming on board kind of brings that expertise, I suppose, that you allude to there, because he's a track record for monetizing that space around content, I suppose. I mean, he's a hugely successful stint with the Yes Network and things like the Legends Hospitality, which he ran with Jerry Jones at the Dallas Cowboys. So he's a huge track record with that, and he's also gone in with The Rock, Dwayne Johnson on the XFL, and him and LeBron James already have a relationship, and all these things have kind of aligned to kind of come together and have this big restructure at FSG. He also has interest, and I've heard him speak on it previously, about interest in European football, and he's quite insightful about how he views it. I mean, he made a big thing about traditions, and it kind of, I suppose, that flies in the face of what we saw with the Super League plot a few weeks back. But he has a majority ownership stake in Toulouse, and last week he took small steps to take a very small minority stake in Malaga in Spain, which I suppose that you can read into that as much as you want, really. But I suppose that positions him well, because it looks to be there's going to be a change of ownership at some stage at Malaga, and they require a capital investment in the short term. And one of the requirements from the judicial administrator there was to have someone be able to come in and sit in board meetings and have a stake. Do you think that might be a logical next step? Because they seem like they're a huge club with, or been in the Champions League not too long ago. They seem a club with enormous potential that kind of fits together with Toulouse. They're almost a similar demographic in terms of their kind of cities, and you feel that they're two clubs that could, with the right structure, go and make quite a successful stint in the league above. Do you think that is something that we could see happen? And is there a possibility, do you feel, to have those come in with the FSG model, or do you think one will stay separate from the other?
It's difficult to know. All I would say on that front is, I think what is happening at the moment, because of the pandemic and because of big revenue shortfalls in particular leagues, France obviously being one with their TV broadcasting deal, which is plummeted in truth, and the same issues with Spain. And in a way, that's why the Premier League domestic renegotiation looks so healthy, even though it's basically a renewal on the same terms. There is a lot of capital out there at the moment, especially American capital, I think, looking at the European sports landscape and market and thinking there's still some real growth, valuation growth here to different degrees. So I think ultimately that the actual issue or question or strategy is there is plenty of capital out there looking for undervalued and underappreciated assets. And underneath that, looking at where there is potential growth in the short to medium term. And if that's, for example, it looks like obviously Super League and set places for Champions League, or what would have been the elite competition, is off the table, at least in the short term. But the query actually is whether, when things get back to normal, and there's obviously a cash crunch for a lot of clubs still that need external investment, when the bounce happens and when people and the world, please God, starts getting back to a little bit more normality, whether those investments at what some people see as an undervalue because of the cash crunch that's been happening means actually those investments in 3 to 5 years actually become quite important strategic positioning for, especially for US side investors that have seen how their US market works. And obviously it's different in Europe with more of the pyramid structure and relegation and competitive balance and everything else that comes with it. But at the same time, people positioning themselves to come out of the other end, the other side of this economic, slump to a degree, so that there are the possibilities and upsides later down the line.
Just to kind of pick up on the point about Premier League rights there, and we'll double back and just finish on topic again. The rights have been kind of stayed at the same rate for the next cycle, which is 2022 to 2025. That has to be seen as a win for the Premier League and its member clubs, because I suppose if it would have gone to auction, then the likelihood is that there was a good chance that those would have been driven down, especially with BT possibly looking at selling the BT Sports side of the business. But it also gives the Premier League, I suppose, a little bit of breathing space, and the clubs themselves some security over their cost base moving forward, that they'll have this for the next 3 years, but also hoping that there will be more interest and those revenues will be driven up by the time 2025 comes around, because AT&T and look like they're going to be going ahead with a huge merger with Discovery. I mean, Discovery already have their kind of fingers in sports pies with Eurosport, and AT&T own Warner Group, which has Turner Sports and interest in the MLB and the NBA. So they seem to be moving towards, we mentioned about Premflix before, about this creating a huge streaming platform which will be bigger than Netflix, but one that also has had a previous interest in sport. So it would be interesting to see whether the likes of themselves and DAZN will be at the table in 2025. And obviously the stronger the broadcasters that are coming to the table to kind of look at these rights, the better for the Premier League and the bottom line for the biggest clubs.
You've summed it up better than I could have done. I mean, I think it's still subject to government sign-off based on an exemption under the Competition Act, and I think there's a consultation going on at present. But I think it's ultimately a very good deal for the Premier League to be able to have such stellar domestic broadcasters who, and just remember, 5 billion out of the 9 billion globally is a huge amount of revenue to guarantee for effectively the next 4 years, because we're still 1 year out of the new deal, with any new deal that would otherwise happen. So having that stability, I think, is a huge win for the Premier League clubs and the Premier League generally. And in a way, it has to be another massive tick box for Richard Masters, who comes in. I'm trying to work out now, almost 2 years ago, and has to deal with COVID. Has to deal with Project Big Picture, has to deal with the European Super League, and has to deal with a £5 billion rights renewal. So, I would hasten to say that, no chief exec of any member association, never mind the Premier League, couldn't have probably had 4 or 5 bigger, more seismic, strategic decisions to make over the last 18 to 20 months and come out the other side looking pretty good and feeling pretty good about what has occurred. So yeah, I completely agree. I think DAZN might have something to say about the auction process now. From what some reports are saying, that they may have wanted to get involved. Who knows whether they would have or not. I think there's loads of interesting side issues around if BT Sport get their next set of games and some of those 12:30s become evening Saturday kickoffs, which obviously become prime position, of whether that becomes an attractive additional set of rights to be able to partially sell by way of BT Sport, if it's minority, if it's majority sell, if it's cooperation agreements with other types of OTT or terrestrial broadcasters. But I think ultimately it's a huge win for the Premier League to guarantee those monies for 4 more years, and probably just bulk up in a way the finances of those clubs to know that they've got 4 years worth of at least 100 to 110 million pounds worth of revenues.
Just to kind of finish with a couple of questions on kind of multi-club ownership, and as we're recording this podcast today, it's emerged that kind of a forgotten face at Liverpool, almost Taiwo Awoniyi, is kind of returned. He's been granted a work permit. He's been on loan. I think it's been at Mainz and Union Berlin for the past 18 months or so. He's been granted a work permit coming back to Liverpool. They signed him 2015 for £400,000, and they're rumoured to be wanting upwards of 8 million to him. I suppose his spell away from the club at clubs like Union Berlin and Mainz has helped drive that value up. And I suppose there was an element there of if FSG were to look at multi-club ownership, you could almost make the case that there are some guys that don't even need to play to be able to make them that kind of regular revenue stream where they play their football elsewhere, they're attached to the club, and ultimately they move on for healthy profits. I mean, we've seen it, what Michael Edwards has been able to do already in the confines of how he works. It kind of opens up that interesting proposition if he is to move on. It's a £7.6 million profit on a player that's never played a game in a red shirt.
Yeah, I think it's, look, in the past, especially Liverpool, there's been a lot of controversy around the transfer committee, hasn't there? And previous managers not necessarily deciding or feeling that they're getting their top players and everything else that comes with it. And you look at recruitment, lots of other clubs who have been a bit hit and miss. And you look at Michael Edwards' main strategic time at the club, and bar a couple of players who, unfortunately, if you look at Keita or Chamberlain, for example, have had bad injuries over that spell, every big signing has been an overwhelming success, in truth. And a lot of the time, just as Chelsea have done brilliantly over a period of time, is you recruit not necessarily for your first team, but you are recruiting top stars who then will go on loan at various clubs and will potentially then earn significant amounts, sometimes from not playing too much first team football. That is going to change a little bit potentially with the new FIFA rules around loan players and the amount of loans that particular clubs can have from the season after next, I believe. But at least in the short term, yeah, it's exactly right. It feeds into the work permit point. It feeds into multi-club ownership. It feeds into cooperation agreements with third-party clubs generally. Is the player trading element of clubs who, in a way, is brought on by financial fair play and needing to break even and needing to be in the black and needing to not make huge losses, which is one way to be able to really push profits in different directions, is a player trading point. We saw it with Philip Coutinho. We've seen it with Suarez back in the day. Liverpool make big profits when they sell their best players, is the truth. Now, obviously, in the last few years, with the commercial drivers from winning the Champions League and winning the Premier League, that's helped immeasurably, and the big commercial deals that come as a result. But player trading for a lot of clubs, big or small, form a major part of that club strategy.
Do you think this is a trend which we're going to see continue? Because I know US investors particularly look at the Premier League as being undervalued. That's certainly the viewpoint from there. I mean, as we touched on before, I mean, NFL teams almost cost prohibitive over there to get involved in, unless you have the deepest of deep pockets. But for kind of owners who are already in situ, I suppose, I mean, having ownership of multiple clubs in different places across Europe. I know you touched on it at the start with the various broadcasting rights that come with it. I mean, some of them can be extremely lucrative, probably not as lucrative as the Premier League, but some of them nevertheless that kind of lucrative streams to be part of. I mean, do you think we're going to see more and more of this? Because obviously, I suppose some clubs their value has plummeted as a result of the pandemic, given the financial pressures they face. Some of them face the brink, and I suppose there are clubs out there who are going to be available at cheaper prices. I mean, Malaga possibly being an example of that. I mean, Toulouse were in dire straits after relegation when RedBird FC took over there. So do you think there's probably going to be more of this as we kind of navigate our way out of the pandemic?
I think, it's important to understand from a valuation perspective what owners are potentially buying. In the States, with the general closed model of the league status, which means no relegation, no promotion, a draft system which effectively reallocates competitive balance on a yearly basis. For example, take the MLS. On the whole, MLS clubs know the minimum amounts that they're going to be receiving every year, and then with drafts and a very stringent set of cost control measures and recruitment parameters. Whereas I think those sophisticated buyers also are fully aware of the value swings that happen in European sports and specifically European football, because on a number of ways, if we take relegation and promotion, that is obviously a big risk and reward multiplier, however you want to value that by way of valuation. And alongside that, there is that perception, as you talked about whether broadcasting rights are still effectively undervalued or overvalued, or whether they've come to a peak, or whether there's going to be drive in the international market. And the last thing that obviously also goes towards valuation is how profitable clubs have been in the past, are currently, and whether they're going to be that way in the future. And a lot of that was driven by the cost control provisions in the Premier League, and in the Football League, the FFP, UEFA provisions as well. So that if, for example, you're in an environment, at least pre-COVID, where you couldn't make big losses, broadcasting rights were increasing either domestically and or internationally, and your club was less likely to get relegated out of the Premier League, that was a pretty solid bet for a good valuation piece. Now, because of clubs having to stem cash flows because of the pandemic, mixed with obviously now a good broadcasting revenue base, and then a query over what's going to happen with UEFA and Premier League cost controls over the next 3 to 4 years, there has to probably be a little bit more feeling of instability in the market, is truth. But instability usually brings with it opportunity, and I guess that's the playoff that different types of investors will be grappling with at the moment.
Just to finish, how do you view the Premier League coming out of COVID? Because I know we touched on the job that Richard Masters has done in terms of having to fight all these fires one after another. It seems that when you look across Europe, I mean, the collapse of that Media Pro deal in France was huge. I mean, they've had to take a deal with, I think it's Canal Plus, they had to go back to on a hugely reduced sum, which ultimately the clubs had already started to spend what they thought they were going to be guaranteed from Media Pro. So, and then there's been similar problems in Italy, and Spain's not been great. And you kind of think that through all this, the Premier League seems like it's only going to strengthen its hand as the dominant force in European football, stepping out of this. It doesn't seem like the brands have been weakened to the extent that they have been elsewhere. I know PSG are probably a different kettle of fish because of the way where they're funded, but certainly with Madrid and Barcelona and Juve, they're sticking to the guns over the Super League. It shows you that the financial pressures they face are very, very real indeed. So the Premier League seems well placed to be the strongest to emerge from what we've seen in the past year.
I think all of that's fair. The one thing I would say is that we're always 1 year behind in terms of accounts, aren't we? So truth is, we're going to see at some point in the next 7 to 8 to 9 months pretty stark Premier League accounts, which are going to show huge losses for that full pandemic year. In truth, we only saw the last accounts based on 3 or 4 months of the pandemic, and granted that was to do with broadcasting rebates as well and other monies, whatever else it might be. But I think that the truth is that it's even though it's slightly delayed or staggered, the current season's Premier League clubs' accounts are not going to look good whatsoever. But in relative terms to some of the continental clubs, I agree, we're in a stronger position, especially if it might actually be because the Premier League itself are looking at ways to be able to soften the short-term losses made by their member clubs because of the longer term broadcasting deal they've been able to get. I also think the other just brief thing to bear in mind is when I was chatting to one of the guys I do another podcast with, Omar Chowdhury from 21st Club, and we were talking about the idea of transfer fee and wage misalignment for the transfer windows gone and upcoming. And, one of the issues was to do with almost a re-equilibrium, a re-emergence of what the new transfer market was going to look like really post-COVID, which is lower transfer fees basically for a new world where everyone's not earning as much money for all the different reasons we've already talked about. But the thing that usually takes a little bit more time to align are wages, because there's always a lag between new contracts and then contracts running out effectively. And I think the one thing that isn't aligned at the moment, and lots of clubs interestingly are talking about it when they're trying to think about buying new players, and this isn't the elite players, they're always going to go for big money and for large wages, are the mid-size Premier League clubs who are looking to renegotiate deals or buy players. That I think there is a real misalignment of wages at present, and what players would think they would be owed by way of renegotiations or new contracts being offered. I still think that there is a misalignment to a degree, and that I think is the next re-equilibrium, if that's the right way of putting things, so that whilst transfer fees and the volume of those transfers obviously decreased rapidly in the windows or part of the windows that have happened so far, the fascinating thing to look out for this current window, I think, from my perspective, is not look behind the 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 mega transfers that happen, and look to the volume and number of those, you'd say, normal deals that are happening into Premier League and between different leagues. And from a wage perspective, it'll be fascinating to see what happens there, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, Liverpool's a prime example. I mean, I know there's often a lot of criticism aimed at FSG in terms of their lack of transfer spend, but wages are something which have increased, accelerated quicker than the rest of the competition for them. I mean, I suppose a lot of that's been brought about by bonus payments from the Champions League, and we'll see another big rise in wages, I imagine, for the next accounting period because of the bonus payments from the Premier League. So for winning the Premier League, so it seems like it's going to be a little while before we, as you touched on there, we start to see the dust settle and actually know what the impact of COVID has actually been, and what the new football looks like, I suppose. But it's been absolutely fascinating having you on, Daniel, to give us your insight, and I really appreciate it. And it's it'd be interesting to see what the next 12-18 months brings in terms of multi-club ownership, but it's never dull at Anfield, and I imagine I don't think any of us were expecting the late Sunday announcement of a European Super League, so that's kind of preoccupied everyone for a couple of weeks at least, but hopefully we'll start to know what the future plans look like away from this and coming out of COVID very soon. But thanks very much to Daniel, and thank you to those of you watching and listening to the podcast at home, and we look forward to welcoming you back for the next edition very soon. Take care.